Ethan Cole roared in the courtroom. "You're the police of the law, and you're just garbage." He launched a kick like he meant to crush her. Monica collapsed onto the cold floor, the sound of impact freezing the entire room. The silence dragged on. No one dared to breathe. Monica pushed herself up, standing tall, her eyes blazing. "The law isn't in your filthy boots. It's in the truth I bring." The whole courtroom erupted. There was no way out for cowardice now. The courtroom glared under fluorescent lights, casting sharp tension onto every face. People packed into wooden benches, carrying a mix of curiosity and weight, all eyes locked on the front where the trial was about to begin. The heavy door swung open, its creaking hinge dragging out like an ominous warning. Lieutenant Ethan Cole strode in with swagger, chin tilted high, sharp eyes, scanning the room before locking onto one target, Monica Harris, sitting upright in the witness chair. The aggressive focus in his eyes froze the air around them. Cole marched forward, each step on the tiled floor loud, deliberate, as if broadcasting dominance. He stopped in front of Monica, leaned just enough for his breath tinged with tobacco and worn leather from his police jacket to hit her nose. His face twisted in a mocking grin, voice slicing through the tense stillness. "You're just here for decoration." The words landed softly as a breeze, but struck with the weight of a slap to everyone's pride in the room. Eyes shifted, some dropped, others turned away. No one spoke, as if complicit in the humiliation. Before anyone could react, Cole suddenly lunged his leg, snapping up like a spring, slamming a kick straight into Monica's stomach with such force that the sound thundered throughout the room. Her body hit the tiled floor with a crack, tore through the silence. She jerked backward, breath punched out of her throat, her face tightening in pain. A deadly silence fell, broken only by the scrape of Cole's boots, as if to underline his control. The audience gasped quietly, a few choking sounds swallowed down everyone, stiff as statues, drowned in fear. Monica lay still for a few seconds, hand pressing hard against her stomach to contain the pain. Slowly she turned over, forcing herself upright, her breath sharp and fast, but her eyes never leaving the man who hit her. She saw it clearly in his stare, that arrogance, a man who believed the boots on his feet could tip the scales of justice. Her legs shook, but she lifted them anyway, inch by inch rising to her feet. She wiped the blood at the corner of her mouth with the back of her hand. The silence in the courtroom stretched endlessly. Every movement she made was a direct challenge to the power standing above her. Cole looked at her, his lips curling again, contempt clear in his gaze. He was certain the woman before him had been pushed into a corner, that the silence of the crowd was a shield for what he had just done. But Monica didn't lower her head. Her dark eyes lit with a fire, not loud or wild, but the kind that burned slow and steady. She knew the kick wasn't just meant to crush her body, but to break her dignity in front of everyone. And she understood if she let it slide today, not only she, but thousands like her out there would forever be seen through that same lens, treated with fists and kicks instead of fairness. Whispers began to rise, scattered but sharp. A woman in the back row brought her hand to her mouth, eyes wide. A man in a suit adjusted his tie, glancing toward the door as if seeking a way out. All those eyes turned away, none willing to face the truth of what had just happened. Cole seemed even more pleased, seeing no one react. He took a long breath, crossed his arms, his triumphant stare filling the room like someone who had just sown fear and knew it. Monica stayed silent, drawing in a deep breath to steady herself. She didn't respond with a scream or a punch, but by standing her ground. Her eyes pierced straight through the arrogant figure before her, and for a flicker of a moment, he flinched. The courtroom held its breath, and the judge froze mid-motion with his gavel, as if unsure how to respond. In the weight of that silence, Monica stepped forward. Every small movement of hers cut into Cole's pride like a blade. Cole growled, his voice low and thick, like it meant to swallow the room whole. "You think you can hold your head up in this courtroom?" He tilted his head, that cruel smile still clinging to his face, but something in his eyes flashed with unease at her unwavering stance. Monica didn't look away. Her mouth opened slowly, voice low and steady, not loud but clear enough for everyone to hear. Your silence weighs more than any sentence. The whole room jolted. A few people looked up, their eyes meeting shame's, spreading like a wave. Cole clenched his fists, veins rising on his forehead. He hadn't expected someone he had just knocked down to stand tall and say something that made even him choke for a sec. Rage surged through him. He stepped forward again, face to face, breath short and heavy between them. His hand twitched, ready to strike again. But this time the silence was no longer a shield. It turned into an invisible weight pressing on him because everyone had heard her words and no one could pretend they hadn't. In that moment, something new began to take root. It didn't come from the kick, nor from the sound of impact, but from the eyes of the woman who had just risen from the cold, tiled floor. The room didn't yet realize they had witnessed the beginning of a storm, one that would not stop within these four walls, but would spread across the city, maybe even farther. Ethan Cole was still standing there, lips curled in a smile, but his gaze was now unsteady. And Monica Harris, though blood still marked her mouth, had sparked a fire in the hearts of those watching, a fire of resistance, of justice that would never stay buried beneath the boots of anyone. The courtroom now felt choked by invisible weight, the air no longer moving, as if even breathing had been suspended in everyone's chest. After Ethan Cole's brutal kick, everything seemed frozen. Scattered whispers rose, then died quickly, giving way to a heavy silence that blanketed the room from top to bottom. Monica Harris bent over, one hand clutching her stomach, breath ragged and coarse, sweat trailing down her temple, yet her gaze remained steady. From where she had fallen, she forced herself upright, slow but determined, her trembling legs demanding strength they barely had. She wiped blood from the corner of her mouth with the back of her hand, the deep red against her dark skin sharpening the defiance in her face. It wasn't weakness, it was pride. She raised her head, eyes locked onto the man who had just attacked her. Cole stood there like someone who believed he had won, lips curled in defiance, eyes burning with contempt. He stepped closer, chest pushed forward, his voice crashing down like a hammer cutting through the thick air. "You think you can hold your head up in this courtroom?" The words came out like a blade aimed at Monica, but stabbing through the entire room, warning that anyone who sided with her would share her fate. He stressed each word, hammering at her pride while flaunting his own unchecked power. Everyone in the gallery heard it clearly, yet all reacted the same way. They lowered their heads. A man in a suit adjusted the file in his hands, eyes fixed on a blank page, his pen frozen mid-word. A middle-aged woman hugged her purse tightly, fingers tapping the strap as if pouring her tension into the leather. A student intern in the back row bit his lip until it bled his shaken hand, setting down the pen, eyes darting away from where Monica stood. All of them made the same choice, retreating into silence to protect themselves. That silence spread across the room so thick and sharp, it felt like even the sound of a pin dropping could startle someone. Monica looked around. She saw every bowed head, every trembling shoulder, every quick glance, followed by retreat. She understood their fear, their dread of confronting the brute force of a police officer. But in that moment, it wasn't the kick that stung the most. It was the silence. It felt more like betrayal than defeat. She lifted her chin, and her voice came out low and steady, not loud, but clear enough to reach everyone in the room. "Your silence weighs more than any sentence." The words rang out sharp and precise, each one landing like a gavel strike on the hearts of those present. Monica's words shook the entire room, even though no one moved. A man who had been trying to take notes suddenly dropped his pen, the sharp clatter against the floor ringing out like a warning bell. A young woman raised a hand to her mouth, eyes welling with tears, unsure whether from sorrow or shame. A lawyer in the front row adjusted his collar, sweat gathering on his brow, feeling as if those words were aimed directly at him. Even the judge paused on his high bench, his gavel hand hesitating, realizing he had never felt so small in front of a witness still standing with blood on her lips. Cole froze for a moment. He hadn't expected Monica to say something like that, much less that it would echo so loudly it seemed to shake the walls. His crooked smile turned into a grinding clench of teeth, his hands balled into fists, veins bulging on his forehead. He looked around, searching for agreement, but saw only heads, bowed, lower eyes avoiding his. The silence he thought was his weapon had turned into the very sentence Monica had spoken. That sentence wasn't just aimed at her, it circled back and marked him, leaving him isolated in a room full of people. Monica was still standing, her breathing uneven, but her eyes sharp fire. Pain still twisted in her stomach, but the strength of her words kept her on her feet. She didn't shout or raise a hand. With nothing but presence and truth, she forced everyone to face themselves. The courtroom, meant to be a place where justice ruled, had become a space where collective fear was exposed. People sat, motionless, silent, as if waiting for someone to wake them, and Monica had done it with a single sentence. The silence that followed no longer served as a shield, it became pressure. The man who had dropped his pen bent to pick it up, but his hand trembled so badly he couldn't grip it. A witness further back tried to rise, lips moving to speak, but when Cole's cold stare swept across him, he dropped back into his seat, sweat trailing down his neck. The threat was still there, but the seed of resistance had already taken root in many. They realized they couldn't sit still forever because their silence was being turned into a sentence hanging above them. In that moment, Monica's gaze became a flame, spreading light into every dark corner of the room. She knew she had unsettled Cole, and that alone proved his kick had failed. He had wanted to break her to prove he was the law, but that very kick and the silence that once protected him had become a burden. True justice didn't lie in the filthy boots he used to strike her, but in the sentence that left the whole courtroom shaken. Monica stood firm, one hand still pressed against her stomach, her eyes proud and steady. She didn't care about the blood slowly dripping down, nor about the eyes that turned away. All she focused on now was carving a truth into the minds of everyone present that silence carries weight, that saying nothing doesn't mean being innocent. And that courtroom, filled with bowed heads, had just received its first sentence, not through paperwork, not by the judge's gavel, but by the heavy judgment of conscience. Late morning light streamed through the tall courtroom windows, casting a thin beam across Monica Harris's cheek. The bruise from the kick was still vivid purple, spreading across her dark skin, making her face look both pained and unbreakable. The room was silent, like an abandoned church. No one dared move too sharply, afraid to disturb the tension hanging in the air. All eyes were locked on the two standing across from each other. On one side, a police officer armed with fists and assumed power. On the other, a woman who had just taken a brutal kick but was still standing, her gaze unwavering. Ethan Cole ground his teeth, jaw clenched tight like he wanted to crush something in his throat. His eyes narrowed with hate. His chin lifted as he looked down on Monica like she was beneath him. He hissed through his teeth, his voice thick and rough as it filled the room. "You're nothing but a parasite feeding off that witness chair." The words spat from his mouth, heavy with contempt, as if to strip the woman before him of all worth. His voice echoed off the stone walls, bouncing back with a filth that seemed to coat the room. Monica stood still, shoulders slightly raised, chin held high. The light hit her eyes, reflecting a calm strength as steady as steel. She took a deep breath, pushing back the dull ache in her stomach, then spoke, her tone even and solid as stone. "You can knock me down, but you'll never knock down the truth." Each word rang clear, not loud, but firm, striking every ear like a bell. It wasn't resistance by force, it was belief unshakable. Her words cut through the gloom like light, causing bowed heads to tremble, drawing hidden eyes behind round glasses back to the woman who still stood. That reply made Cole freeze for a second, then fury surged. He slammed his hand against the wooden table, the crack exploding through the room like a gunshot. shot, sending a stack of papers into the air, scattering across the tiled floor. The impact made those nearby flinch, some covering their mouths to stifle a gasp. Loose sheets drifted down, some sliding beneath the witness stand, others fluttering all the way to the back rows. It wasn't just a burst of rage, it was Cole trying to reclaim the room, using noise and destruction to reassert his brute authority. But that aggression couldn't drown out what Monica had just said. Her words still echoed, hitting the minds of everyone in the room. A man in the back row brought a hand to his mouth, eyes wide at the scene unfolding. A young woman bowed her head, but her trembling hand gripped the wooden bench tightly. A young man in a dress shirt, likely a law student, sat near the wall, whispering to himself in a choked voice. She just said what no one else dared to. These small reactions were clear signs that the silence was beginning to crack. Cole's eyes were still screaming. He stepped forward, face flushed, red hands clenched into fists. He wanted to take back control with fear again, to wipe away the weight of that sentence with violence. But the closer he got, the brighter Monica's eyes became, calm, steady, like still water hiding a strong current beneath. She didn't back away. Her gaze met his like a challenge, forcing him to face a truth he couldn't destroy. For the first time, Cole felt the weight in his own steps, no longer carrying the force they had when he first walked in. The courtroom was thick with tension. People in the back held their breath. Some covered their mouths to stifle a gasp. Others clenched their wrists so tight their knuckles turned white. The fear remained, but something else had entered the room, a sense of awe. They were witnessing an uneven fight, but also a woman standing tall in pride, turning pain into strength. That alone began to make the silent ones feel ashamed of their own cowardice. Papers still floated down. The slam on the table still rang in everyone's heads, but loudest of all was the sentence just spoken, sharp as a blade, snapping people to attention. You can knock me down, but you'll never knock down the truth. It wasn't just an answer to Cole, it was a wake-up call to the entire room. They understood then that no matter how hard the kick, no matter how loud the slam of a hand on wood, there are things that cannot be destroyed. Justice and truth, when spoken by someone beaten but still standing, become unstoppable. Cole stomped forward, breath-heavy, eyes burning, but at that moment he caught a glimpse of a few faces behind him. Though their heads were still lowered and silence remained, something had changed in their eyes. No longer only fear, now a flicker of resistance, a faint light that made him hesitate. He realized the silence was shifting, that the invisible sentence Monica had spoken was now circling around him. The witness chair he called a parasite had become a platform for truth, and suddenly his feet no longer felt steady. Monica looked at him, her gaze steady, blood still on her lips, but her voice now calm and even. She knew her words had reached every ear, had planted guilt, even shame in their hearts. She also knew Cole was shaken inside his own rage. The pounding on the table and the scattered papers weren't signs of strength, but of someone losing control. And losing control meant weakness. That alone made Monica feel she had won the first round, not with fists, but with a truth that could not be trampled. The courtroom still held its breath. No one dared to speak, but the silence now wasn't the same as before. Before, it was complicity, it was cowardly fear. Now it was anticipation. People were waiting to see what would happen next, waiting to see if this woman could shake the entire system just by standing tall. And Cole, the man who once believed he was the law, was realizing for the first time that the silence was no longer on his side. The judge's gavel pounded again and again, each strike demanding the room return to order. The sound bounced off the cold walls, but no one believed a few knocks could calm the storm sweeping through the courtroom. Ethan Cole stood firm, his body trembling with rage, eyes bloodshot like a cornered beast. Papers still lay scattered across the floor after the table slam, but no one bent to pick them up. All eyes were locked on what would happen next, the tension stretching past its breaking point. Cole inhaled deeply, chest heaving, then roared, his voice crashing like thunder into every ear. "This is my law. In this city, the police are justice." That statement wasn't just a declaration, it hit the room like a punch. It laid bare the truth that to him, the law was nothing more than a thin veil for power guns and badges. Those in the front rows lowered their heads, shoulders trembling, some closing their eyes as if to shut out the brutal truth. The judge on the high bench struck the gavel harder, but now it sounded like nails on a coffin lid, powerless against Cole's shout. Monica didn't flinch. Her eyes blazed under the sunlight slanting through the window. Her cheek was bruised, but a faint smile appeared, not mocking, but the kind that saw weakness hiding behind aggression. Her voice rang out short and calm, each word sharp and clear. Justice isn't something you carry in your pocket. It wasn't loud, but it stabbed straight into the chest, puffed with arrogance. The room shuddered. A few people gasped like they had just heard the truth. No one dared to speak. For a moment, Cole froze, his twisted grin replaced by a scowl. He hadn't expected the woman he had kicked down to strike back with a sentence that made the whole room breathe harder. Silence held for a few seconds, then a shaky voice rose from the back row, soft but firm. "Stop it." The sound wasn't loud, but it echoed like a drop of water breaking the surface of a still lake. Another voice followed, a whisper filled with fear. "That's enough. He's gone too far." Cole spun around instantly, his eyes flaring toward the voice. That glare was so fierce the speaker froze in place, face-pale lips trembling, unable to say another word. Cole didn't need to shout. His look alone blanketed the room in fear. People shrank back, turning away from his eyes as if making contact would bring trouble. The weight of that stare was so intense that a few sitting near the door shifted in their seats, half rising, then stopping themselves, afraid that stare might land on them next. The air in the room turned thick, so dense that each breath felt heavy. Everyone sensed something was about to explode, like a string stretched too tight, needing only the slightest touch to snap. The sound of quickened breathing, rapid heartbeats, all merged into the tense silence blanketing the courtroom. The judge stopped his hand, his eyes flickering with doubt, yet he said nothing. He, too, was caught in the swirl of fear. Papers still littered the tiled floor, some gently rustled by the breeze from the ceiling fan, quiet proof of chaos being held in check. Monica looked across the courtroom, then locked eyes with Cole. Her faint smile remained, but her gaze was cold as steel. She didn't step back, didn't waver, her feet rooted to the floor like tree roots. She knew the words she had spoken had planted a sliver of light in everyone's mind, small but present, and Cole, with his shouting and blazing glare, was only proving everything she had said. She understood that if she fell again, the silence would return, but if she stood just 1 minute longer, the fear would begin to crack. Cole growled low in his throat, his footsteps echoing through the room as he approached her. He wanted to turn her words into a joke, to crush that faint smile with another blow. But the distance between them, just a few steps, stretched like a chasm. With each step he took, Monica's gaze sharpened, and that gaze, like a freshly honed blade, waited to slice through his rising arrogance. The room followed every movement, holding its breath, waiting for the moment everything would erupt. In that air tension reached its peak. No one dared speak again, but inside, something was shifting. Cole's scream. Monica's calm reply, the trembling voice that was silenced. Together they formed a chaotic symphony building toward a climax, not yet heard, felt. Every furrowed brow, every swallowed breath, every glance was now part of an invisible verdict, and everyone knew that with just one more move, this room would shatter like a bomb held in too long. Monica drew a deep breath, balancing on legs still aching, her eyes fixed on the man before her. She knew the string had stretched to its limit, waiting to snap. And once it did, nothing could be undone. Cole's scream didn't frighten her. Instead, it confirmed that he was losing control. And when a man is left with only his voice to assert power, that power has already begun to fall apart. The courtroom was now like a glass sphere, and everyone could see the cracks forming. And Monica Harris, with a faint smile and a short reply, had widened those cracks more than ever. Ethan Cole, shouting himself hoarse, didn't realize that his voice was tearing down the final veil, leaving him exposed to the truth. And that truth, though buried beneath silence, was now waiting to ignite like oil meeting flame. The courthouse hallway stretched endlessly, a narrow path framed by peeling paint and dim yellow lights casting shadows on the worn gray tiles below. After the heavy courtroom doors closed behind her, the space carried a different tension. Less noise, fewer whispers, but just as heavy. Monica Harris stepped through the doorway, her breath still ragged, one hand instinctively pressing against the pain in her stomach. The blood on her lip had dried, leaving a dark streak, but her face showed no grimace, only a burning stare. Her eyes were sharp, filled with pain and defiance, making passers-by instinctively look away. The hallway sounds were soft footsteps, the rustle of paper from clerks carrying files, all folded into the stifling atmosphere. People passed Monica, glancing briefly before lowering their eyes, avoiding the fierce look glowing from her bruised face. Her presence seemed to shrink the corridor, slowing everything down. A high-ranking officer with a salt and pepper haircut happened to glance up and freeze. For a second, his eyes widened, as if recognizing something familiar from internal files. His voice dropped low, almost a whisper, but clear enough for the person beside him to hear. Could it be her? The words were quiet, but carried weight, sending a jolt through those nearby. Several eyes turned toward Monica's back, filled with surprise, suspicion, even fear. The officer blinked repeatedly, as if he didn't quite believe what he had said. He said nothing more, just gripped the file in his hand, tighter, face tightening with unease. But those close enough had heard him, and they knew the phrase "her" wasn't meant for just any witness. It hinted at something more, a secret no one in that hallway dared speak aloud in a moment so thick with tension. Not far away, a young witness stood frozen, his face still soft with youth, his shirt wrinkled from sitting too long in court. He stared after Monica's slow, steady step, eyes wide. He shook his head, muttering to himself, though loud enough for a few people to catch, "No way, she's not just a witness." His voice trembled, full of disbelief and awe, instantly sparking quiet murmurs around him. The whispers began to ripple like a wave, not yet loud, but enough to tighten the air. People started looking at Monica differently, with eyes filled not just with curiosity, but with caution, as if she carried something far beyond what they had imagined. Monica didn't turn back, didn't respond. She walked on her shoes, tapping steadily against the tile floor, each step creating a soft but firm rhythm. Every footfall seemed to compress the air in the hallway, tightening the chests of those watching. Light from the large window at the far end poured in, casting a strange glow across her face, half in shadow, half in light. Like someone who had just walked through a brutal battle and was now heading straight toward a summit no one had foreseen. At the end of the hallway, Ethan Cole stood waiting. His arms were crossed back against the wall, posture relaxed like someone above it all. His lips curled into a smug smile, eyes gleaming with triumph. He watched Monica still riding the high of that courtroom kick. To Cole, what he had done was proof of power, a reminder that he could humiliate anyone. His face radiated self-satisfaction, his shoulders rising with the quiet rhythm of a whistle. In the narrow world he had built for himself, he was the undisputed victor. He had no idea that in that very moment whispers were already spreading a truth he couldn't begin to imagine. Cole saw the stares following Monica and assumed they were laced with pity, curiosity for the one he had knocked down. He didn't see the shift in those eyes, didn't recognize that something far beyond pity had taken hold. Because Monica no longer appeared as a battered witness, she had become a question mark, a presence carrying a hidden weight beneath her calm exterior. The hallway quieted, footsteps scattered, leaving behind a few stolen glances trailing in her wake. Monica passed beneath the window, sunlight catching her bruised yet proud face, making her stand out even more. She didn't need to speak or turn around, but that silence was heavier than any declaration. Inside, she knew the secret wouldn't stay buried much longer, and the truth would soon come to light. She wasn't in a hurry. Every step she took was a statement that Cole's kick hadn't broken her, and had instead brought the secret closer to its moment of detonation. The salt and pepper-haired officer stood frozen, his hand trembling as he gripped the file. He didn't say another word, but his eyes confirmed everything. He knew, he recognized her, and he understood that revealing the truth would shake the ground. The young witness remained stunned, watching Monica like someone watching a story unfold beyond his comprehension, and Cole kept whistling, his grin widening, completely blind to the shift happening right there in the hallway. That space with its yellow lights, gray tiles, echoing footsteps, and quiet whispers had become the starting point of a storm. A secret, somehow, not yet revealed, but already powerful enough to make hearts beat faster, to make the air feel tight, ready to explode. Monica Harris kept walking steady and sure, leaving behind surprise, smugness, and confusion. And everyone there in that hallway knew they had just witnessed a moment that could never be buried. While the courthouse hallway simmered with hushed whispers and cautious glances in a corner of the courtroom just after recess, a young law student remained seated. He sat in the back row, hands trembling as he held his phone, the screen showing a short video he had secretly recorded. The image shook slightly, the lighting uneven. Monica Harris's face appeared for a few seconds, and then, the moment Ethan Cole's boot slammed into her stomach, exploded onto the screen. The crack of impact echoed loud and clear enough to make anyone watching feel the shock. The student watched it several times, his mind racing, then took a deep breath and posted it on Twitter with the short caption, "Cop kicks Black woman in court." The clip appeared amid the day's flood of news, but within 10 minutes the first shares began to appear. A few small accounts, mostly classmates, added their own comments. Unbelievable. He really did that in court. From those early reactions, the current grew quickly, sweeping the video far beyond campus. Another user added the hashtag #JusticeInCourt in the replies, and instantly it became a rallying point for outrage. Within 2 hours, the hashtag had climbed to the top of trending topics, with tens of thousands sharing, reacting, and expressing fury. The footage didn't need to be sharp or polished. The kick spoke for itself. Viewers saw Monica fall, saw Cole standing tall, his smug expression unmistakable, saw the heavy silence in a room supposedly built for justice. The whole courtroom went silent. "This is disgusting," wrote one account with tens of thousands of followers, and that sentence spread almost as fast as the video itself. Other users echoed the same words, added angry emojis, and helped fuel a wave of collective emotion. From student cafes to cramped office break rooms where people scrolled during lunch, the clip played on screen after screen. People passed it to one another, capturing key moments. Cole's kick, Monica's pained but proud face, the shock in the eyes of those who watched it happen. It all became undeniable evidence not just of a single act, but of the silent complicity of everyone who said nothing. One account, its profile photo a solid black square, posted a caption beneath the clip that left many in stunned silence. "Without this video, justice would be buried." The words hit a nerve, tapping into a deep shared fear. People knew that if this moment hadn't been captured, it would have been twisted, erased in emotionless reports, wiped clean by the hands of those in power. And that thought alone made the video impossible to ignore, a piece of social evidence, a wake-up call. Beneath every share, the wave of outrage grew stronger. One user wrote, "We've seen this too many times, but we can't stay silent anymore." Another commented, "An entire justice system sat there and let him kick a woman in open court. What kind of justice is that?" Every comment struck like a hammer against the image of law and order. Edited clips began to spread quickly, zooming in on the moment of the kick, freezing on Cole's smug expression, framing his eyes at the height of his satisfaction. Large text was added, "This is justice," turning it into a viral poster of accusation. It wasn't just ordinary users, independent journalists began to join in. Several news platforms on social media reposted the video with headlines meant to grab attention: "Police officer assaults Black woman inside courtroom." The post was shared tens of thousands of times within hours, accompanied by short analyses. The issue isn't just the kick, it's that no one in that courtroom spoke up. These words sent the fury spiraling further, every account like a spark feeding a growing blaze. blaze. In a cramped dorm room, the law student who uploaded the video sat in front of his screen, stunned by how fast it was spreading. His phone buzzed nonstop with notifications. Strangers from across the country messaging him asking if he witnessed it firsthand, if he had more proof. Sweat broke across his forehead, but in his eyes burned something new, a belief that his small action might actually change something. He remembered the courtroom, the silence, and how he too had stayed quiet. But now, at least the phone in his hand had broken that silence. Meanwhile, Ethan Cole had no idea. He still stood at the end of the hallway, calm, chin high. He was busy lulling himself into a sense of victory, unaware that in just 2 short hours the image of his kick had become a symbol of abuse. Every angry eye online was now locked on him, making him a public enemy, even as he continued to smirk under flickering yellow lights. And Monica Harris, her footsteps echoed steadily, each one a reminder that truth cannot be buried, especially when the world has already seen it. The storm, called justice in court, kept building. From a shaky clip, it had become a national conversation. People weren't just talking about the kick anymore. They were talking about the silence, the failure of an entire system to stop something like that from happening in the one place it never should. That short video, barely half a minute long, was enough to smash through the wall of denial, exposing what Cole had tried to hide as a public disgrace. And from it, an unprecedented wave had risen, one with the power to sweep away everything fake hiding beneath the mask of justice. As the video spread like wildfire, it quickly jumped from Twitter to Facebook and TikTok, 2 platforms where outrage could erupt in seconds. The shaky frames of the kick were clipped into short looping segments across hundreds of thousands of posts. The sound of Monica Harris's body hitting the floor, the gasps from the courtroom, all remained untouched, like a bleeding wound that couldn't be hidden. Large subtitles were added, close-ups of Cole's blazing eyes and smug grin placed beside the image of Monica collapsing, turning that moment into a symbol of abuse of power. On Facebook, a wave of debate exploded out of control. Posts with short, furious captions flooded feeds. Is this a courtroom or a cage fight? If justice is in a kick, then justice died long ago. Alongside the outrage, a smaller group emerged defending Ethan Cole with every possible argument. One account, using a national flag as a profile picture, wrote, "She provoked him first." Cole only reacted in self-defense. These comments quickly drew thousands of replies, most of them fiercely critical. On the opposing side, the tone grew sharper. One user left a comment that gained tens of thousands of likes, kicking a black woman in court, ilse disgrace to the bad. "This isn't justice. This is a shame." The words spread like wildfire, screenshotted and reposted, becoming a rallying cry. Thousands repeated it, turning it into a defining quote of the outrage. TikTok videos layered that line over intense background music, bold text flashing across the scene, amplifying the impact of the kick, with dramatic effect fueling the wave further. The comment sections turned into real battleground. One side shouted that Cole was set up, that Monica provoked him intentionally. The other side fought back with still images, zoomed frames, Cole's hostile glare, his twisted smile, Monica falling with pain on her face, but eyes locked on him. "Is this provocation, or is this proof of brutality?" one person wrote, and that comment became a centerpiece, shared tens of thousands of times. Engagement spiked by the minute. Facebook groups that once had only a few thousand members suddenly exploded with hundreds of new posts every hour. People screenshotted fiery comments, added angry emojis, and reposted them in other communities. On TikTok, slow-motion clips of the kick were edited with dramatic filters. One person added bold red text, "When silence means guilty." Another stitched in Monica's quote at the end, "Your silence weighs more than any sentence." The contrast between the kick and her words turned the video into a phenomenon, pulling in millions millions of views overnight. Beneath the chaos, one question began to emerge, repeating across comments, videos, and posts. Who is that woman? At first, it appeared as a small curiosity in short lines of text, but gradually, it became the central question haunting the entire online community. Who is Monica Harris? How could a woman stand back up after that brutal kick and respond with a sentence that silenced an entire courtroom? The question carried curiosity, admiration, and a hint of suspicion. Accounts with large followings began to dig deeper into the topic. One independent journalist wrote, "This woman's identity will change the entire story. She's not just a witness. The way she stands, the way she looks, the way she carries herself, she's someone familiar with power." The post quickly turned into a trending topic, drawing tens of thousands of shares. People zoomed in on screenshots of Monica in the video, commenting, "Those eyes don't belong to a witness. Those eyes belong to a leader." In this online war, Ethan Cole still had his supporters, but they were growing weaker under the rising wave. Every comment defending him drew dozens, sometimes hundreds of replies pushing back. People used the video itself to prove him wrong frame by frame, dismantling every excuse. The truth had been recorded, and no amount of spin could erase it. The opposition grew louder, their voices stronger, turning the digital storm into something too powerful for any weak defense to withstand. On TikTok, one particular video spread widely. It cut between the kick and the silent stares of those in the courtroom. A line of white text appeared over a black screen. "Silence is a verdict." It quickly hit millions of views, and the comment section flooded with short, forceful reactions. Justice was trampled. Who is that woman? We need the truth. The mix of outrage and curiosity spread everywhere, making this story the center of attention across all platforms. In small rooms, lit only by phone screens reflecting tired faces scrolling late into the night, people felt they were part of something real. A black woman kicked in open court, the silence of the courtroom, and now the explosion online all merged into a collective indictment. They didn't know who Monica Harris was, but they knew she couldn't just vanish like an ordinary witness. And the question, who is that woman, kept burning, sparking in every comment, every video, every post. The online battle was no longer just a stream of empty words. It had become a real front line where the identity of one woman and the truth about justice were being fought over. And somewhere within this very chaos, Monica Harris began to emerge as something unusual, not a victim, but the center of an event that could change everything. Night fell, but the city still buzzed with headlines and video clips flooding every social media platform. The storm didn't stop online. It spilled over into television, where millions sat before their screens waiting for analysis for something clearer. Inside a brightly lit studio, the air was hot and charged. Cameras panned across an audience, whispering eyes tense and locked on the stage. A popular political talk show had dedicated its entire prime-time slot to the case. Spotlights beamed down on the round table where the host and two commentators sat, each with printed stills from the viral video in front of them. The host spoke first, voice deep and steady. "Tonight we're discussing an event shaking the entire nation. A courtroom video has ignited social media. A police officer kicked a black woman in the middle of a trial. The question is, was this the act of one man, or is it the raw face of systemic abuse?" The camera turned to the first guest, a well-known political commentator known for his blunt takes. He placed his hand on the table, tapped his pen against the paper, then looked directly into the lens, eyes unwavering. His voice rang loud and dry. "This is the clearest example of abuse of power. It didn't happen in a dark alley. It wasn't hidden. It happened in a courtroom, the one place that's supposed to stand for justice. When a cop can kick a woman in front of a judge, lawyers, witnesses, and no one steps in, that means the whole system is rotten. The audience murmured in unison, some nodding, a few gasps rising from the front rows. The camera cut, and the host signaled the tech crew. On the big screen behind them, the clip played again. The shaky footage appeared Monica Harris seated on the witness stand, Ethan Cole stepping forward, speaking with menace, then kicking her. The courtroom froze. Monica collapsed, then the image paused on her blazing eyes as she stood back up. The clip played twice, and each time the studio fell silent before a wave of murmurs returned. Disgust in a woman in the front row whispered, her voice trembling. "I've never seen anything like that, not even in movies." A middle-aged man beside her nodded, his hands clenched tight. The outrage spread the crowd, leaning together, whispering, every face etched with tension. The camera moved slowly, capturing red eyes, fists, gripping hard enough to break as if trying to shatter the injustice playing out on screen. The host waited for the wave of emotion to peak, then leaned toward the second guest, a young female attorney. She adjusted her microphone, her voice calm but fiery. "We can clearly see no one in that courtroom spoke up. That is more terrifying than the kick. It shows that fear has grown so strong that silence became the choice. And that silence, as the woman herself said, weighs more than any sentence. But what strikes me most is her identity. Who can hold their head high in a moment like that, face violence directly, and still keep that steady gaze? That can't be just an ordinary witness." The question made the studio audience murmur because they were wondering the same thing. The host nodded, about to respond, when the backstage technician's phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. The host signaled to take it, and after a few seconds, a man's voice came through live on the air. The line crackled slightly, but the voice was firm, trembling, not from fear, but urgency. "I know her, and trust me, she is not a regular witness." The studio froze. Cameras swept across wide eyes, a few hands covering mouths. The commentator dropped his pen without noticing. The young attorney sat upright, eyes sharp, listening closely. The host took a deep breath, trying to keep his tone steady, but couldn't hide the tension. "You're saying you know her. Can you be more specific?" There was silence on the line for a few seconds, only the sound of quick breathing. The man continued, his voice low and steady. "I can't reveal everything right now, but I can say this: she is not the witness you think she is. She holds a position that even that cop, the one who kicked her, would have to bow to. Just wait. The truth is going to shock all of you." A soft click. The call ended abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in the studio. The host sat frozen for a few seconds, then looked up, eyes locked on the camera. The room was dead quiet, the audience holding their breath as if they'd just heard a secret too big to process. The commentator shook his head slowly, muttering, "If this is true, we're about to witness an earthquake." The crowd stirred again, murmurs turning into a wave. Some shouted, "Tell us who she is." Others stood eyes wide as if they had seen something unbelievable. The host tapped the table for order, but even he was shaken from excitement and confusion. On social media, just minutes after the broadcast, thousands were quoting the call comments flooding in. "Not a regular witness. Then who is she?" Under the blazing studio lights, sweat dotted the host's forehead, and the guests sat in silence, no one daring to speak another word. The air felt suffocating, and everyone understood that the line between an ordinary act of violence and an explosive secret was now measured in mere moments. And as the camera swept across the audience, mouths slightly open, eyes full of anticipation, it was clear everyone in the studio was holding their breath, as if standing before a barely cracked door, hiding a truth that once flung open would change everything. While the public was still reeling from the mysterious phone call on live television, another event quietly unfolded in a dimly lit office high up in police headquarters. It was the former police chief's old workspace, its metal cabinet still packed with files not yet cleared out. People assumed everything had been locked down, but in a hidden corner, a few folders had been slipped out. Among them was a document stamped in red, a signed and sealed appointment order dated less than a week ago. On that page, the words stood clear: Monica Harris, Chief of Police City of Name. This revelation didn't spread like a viral video. It started with a quiet leak. A disgruntled staff member had discreetly sent a photo of the document to an independent journalist. Within an hour, the image appeared on the homepage of a well-known investigative brand and was rapidly reshared by dozens of major accounts. If the earlier video had stirred outrage, this document left the public stunned. The name Monica Harris, once a mystery, now appeared in official print confirming her as the highest-ranking officer in the city's police department. Social media exploded again, this time not from the kick, but from the stunning reversal. "She's the police chief" flooded the timelines alongside zoomed-in images of the appointment order flooded with shock emojis. No one could believe that the woman kicked to the ground in front of the public, the one who stood up with fire in her eyes and a voice that silenced a courtroom, was the newly appointed superior of the man who attacked her. The irony ignited both rage and awe as the truth revealed something no one had dared imagine: Ethan Cole had just assaulted his new boss. Mainstream media quickly joined in. Major news networks launched special reports bannering across screens: identity of witness revealed, new police chief Monica Harris. Analysts pointed out that the case had gone far beyond police brutality. It now involved a shocking power dynamic between the attacker and the victim. Viewers who were once horrified by the act now felt even greater fury, realizing this wasn't just a personal insult, it was an assault on the city's new symbol of justice. Inside newsrooms, phones rang off the hook as reporters scrambled to verify the document. With each passing minute, more sources confirmed its authenticity. Legal experts in police governance appeared on air explaining that an officer attacking their superior in a public courtroom was one of the most egregious breaches of discipline in the force's history. They emphasized that this incident would undoubtedly trigger a full-scale investigation, one that could not be buried in a simple internal report. The online community once again rushed to uncover everything about Monica Harris. Old articles about her career were reshared, and brief past interviews resurfaced. People discovered she had participated in numerous reform campaigns and fought against internal discrimination within the department. The image of her sitting on the witness stand, calm yet proud, now carried 10 times the weight as the public realized that wasn't the gaze of an ordinary witness, but of a leader stepping straight into the eye of the storm. Meanwhile, Ethan Cole still hadn't learned the news had leaked. He gave himself a break in a small room at the end of the hallway, casually smoking, convinced he was still in control. But out there, every click, every share was turning him into a national mockery, a man who had publicly kicked the very person he was supposed to call chief. And as the news spread, all eyes began to turn toward him, awaiting the inevitable collapse. The secret had exploded, and this time it wasn't through a mysterious phone call or hallway whispers, but through stamped documents, official papers that couldn't be denied. The name Monica Harris had stepped out from the shadow of doubt and into undeniable truth. The entire city was in shock, the entire nation stirred, and Cole, in his ignorant satisfaction, still didn't realize his final moments of smugness were already ticking down. Major city newsrooms quickly rode the wave. They pieced together every detail from the past days, from the explosive video to the leaked appointment letter, threading it all into a coherent timeline. The first headline appeared on the homepage of a respected publication, the banner running across the screen: "Witness assaulted in courtroom." Actually, the new police chief. No commentary was needed. The words alone made readers sit upright. Within minutes, hundreds of other outlets followed, all using the same image of Monica Harris facing off against Ethan Cole as their centerpiece. Each headline paired with the same sharp question: What happens when a subordinate attacks the head of the force? Inside newsrooms, reporters raced against the clock. Phones rang non-stop and internal emails were stacked with drafts. They pulled every record from Monica's career, from her early days as a rookie to her role in major crackdowns. Each detail added up to highlight one clear truth: Monica Harris was never a footnote. Her appointment as police chief was already newsworthy, but now, with Cole's kick as the flashpoint, the story carried an impact few could have foreseen. The national television network stepped in, and the noon broadcast changed its script in a heartbeat. The leaked appointment document appeared on the large screen, and the anchor read each line slowly with deliberate emphasis. On social media, the image was paired side by side with the moment Monica wiped blood from the corner of her mouth, creating a dual symbol: on one side cold paper marked with a red seal, on the other a real person with an unyielding gaze. The contrast only fueled public outrage, exposing a cruel irony too sharp to be fabricated. Analysts released their takes, and scholars posted long opinion pieces on digital platforms. They didn't just highlight the severity of the violent act, but also explored the deeper implications of a regular officer publicly insulting and assaulting their superior. Some argued it revealed how deeply ingrained the culture of abuse had become, to the point where someone like Cole believed he could do anything without consequence. These articles spread rapidly, readers flocking to the comments section, both furious and eager for the moment justice might flip the script. In cafes, conversations buzzed without pause. People debated Monica, the silence inside the courtroom, and the inevitable reckoning awaiting Cole. On sidewalks, groups of young people huddled around phone screens, watching updates and shouting in outrage. Every street seemed to pulse with the shared breath of a public waiting for an explosion they all sensed was coming. In the public's mind, Cole had shifted from a hardened figure to a symbol of corruption, while Monica, though still silent, had become the embodiment of a new force. That contrast fueled anticipation, making everyone restless. One question hung everywhere: when will she appear to deliver the final word? Curiosity had evolved into a countdown, with people tracking the hours until the game turned. And as the news cycle surged, each story heightening the stakes, the entire city, perhaps the entire nation, shared one sentiment: waiting for the twist that would redefine justice as they thought they knew it. The morning at the city police headquarters felt different, with dozens of satellite news vans crowding the sidewalks, camera lights flashing, and reporters jostling for every inch of space to secure the closest spot. Inside the main hall, every seat was taking the air thick with anticipation. Everyone knew today would bring an official statement, something that could change everything. When the backstage door swung open, Monica Harris stepped out, posture upright, her face still bearing marks from the past few days. At that moment, hundreds of camera flashes burst like fireworks, etching a historic moment into every frame. She walked to the wooden podium at the center, rested her hands lightly on the microphone, and scanned the sea of faces in front of her. Not a whisper broke the silence. The room held in solemn stillness, everyone waiting for her words. Monica paused for a few seconds, took a deep breath, then spoke with resolve. "I am the new chief of police." Just 4 simple words, but they hit like an explosion, shattering the tension that had been building for days. The hall erupted into chaos, reporters raising their hands all at once, shouting her name, cameras whirring non-stop, hundreds of questions flying toward the stage. Everyone present, including the officers standing behind the press row, froze for a moment, then broke into applause mixed with cheers. The truth had been confirmed, no longer a leak or rumor, but a public declaration in front of the entire media. A young female reporter shouted her voice, cracking, "What's your our response to Lieutenant Cole's actions. Monica remained composed, didn't answer right away. She let her eyes sweep across the row of lenses, allowing the flashes to burst one beat longer. Then she spoke slowly. Justice cannot stand on silence, and it cannot be bent by a single kick. I witnessed it, and I believe everyone here has seen the truth in those images. Her answer sent another wave through the room, reporters scrambling to write it down, their faces lighting up at capturing such a defining quote. Outside, the crowd roared, hundreds gathered around the large screen broadcasting live, all eyes fixed on the stage. When they heard those words, applause erupted, voices chanting Monica's name rising in waves. The truth had broken past these walls, escaped the suffocating days of silence, and become a declaration that rang out with undeniable force. Inside the hall, a few older officers exchanged glances, their eyes complex. They understood this moment was not just the arrival of a new leader, but the beginning of a deep-rooted transformation. Because when the chief of police stands before the press and reclaims her role right after being attacked, that image will never fade. It imprints itself on the public's mind, reminding them that justice still has a chance to be reborn. Reporters continued their barrage of questions, but Monica only answered what was necessary. She didn't speak much, didn't get lost in details, but kept every sentence short and deliberate. That only gave her words more weight. The atmosphere in the hall felt like an electric current. Every gaze fixed on her seemed to glow as if they'd found a new anchor after days of chaos. Outside, the crowd watching through the screen erupted in excitement. They talked, shared their emotions, and most importantly, they felt hope, because the truth could no longer be hidden, and the woman who had been kicked down in court had stood up not just to defend herself, but to claim her place as a leader. The long-awaited twist had arrived, and it rang out loud, echoing like a bell, waking an entire city lost in doubt. Monica's declaration rang through the hall like a clean strike, cutting through all waiting and disbelief. Hundreds of reporters hissed with reaction shouts echoing from all directions. Microphones pointed at the stagehands, raised with a flood of overlapping questions. Cameras flashed nonstop, the lights so blinding that they made the stage look like it was burning under a storm of flashes. Some reporters jumped to their feet, voices breaking with excitement, one even falling out of their seat in the scramble to catch every second. The chaos surged like a tidal wave, sweeping away all efforts at control from the security staff. The hall had now become a sea of sound shouts, names being called, footsteps pounding like a battlefield. Questions overlapped too fast to catch. How will you deal with Cole? What reforms will you implement? How did that kick change you? The whole space seemed ready to explode, the newly revealed truth turning into a surge of electricity, jolting every person present. Awe filled every glance, excitement mixed with outrage, all blending into a force that made the hall tremble. In that moment, one corner of the hall held a completely contrasting image. Ethan Cole sat frozen in the row reserved for officers, his entire body still. The chaos around him felt blocked off by an invisible pane of glass, leaving only a dull ringing in his ears that drowned out every sound outside. His face had drained of all color, pale as paper lips, trembling slightly, eyes wide but unfocused. He stared at Monica, standing under the lights, each word she spoke carving into him like a blade, erasing the last remnants of the illusion of victory he had clung to. Cole had once believed that his kick would stand as proof of his dominance, a moment that would strike fear and submission into the room. But now, the truth laid bare had turned him into the most pathetic figure present, the man who had walked himself straight into the abyss. His thoughts spiraled, scrambling for justification while knowing there was none, helpless, as every camera lens now pointed his way, each shutter click firing straight into the corpse of his collapsing dignity. His eyes darted, and as they met the cheering faces of the reporters, he knew there was no escape left. The contrast in the room was undeniable. One side, a storm of rising cheers and chaos. The other, the silhouette of a silenced officer crumbling under the weight of truth. Monica remained composed, standing still at the podium, letting everyone witness Cole's desperate silence. In that instant, the balance of power shifted completely, and the city would never forget this image. A black woman once kicked to the floor in a courtroom, now standing tall, declaring herself the new chief of police, while the man who struck her sat paralyzed, face pale, as if already staring down the sentence about to fall. Immediately after the explosive press conference, the police department's disciplinary committee convened a special session. The spacious room, typically used for internal meetings, suddenly became the focus of every eye. The air was heavy chairs lined in 2 long rows with a gray-covered table in the center and microphones set to record every word. On the large screen up front, the video clip that had shaken the internet played once more. Every frame was sharp and cold. From Cole's aggressive approach, the explosive kick to the moment Monica fell and then rose with defiant eyes. The room was dead silent, only the audio from the video echoed each sound, hidden like a hammer. When the clip ended, the first witness was called. A middle-aged man in a dark suit stepped forward, his voice hoarse with tension. He recounted the entire event, his eyes occasionally glancing at Cole as if measuring his reaction. A woman, seated in the back row, also stood trembling but firm. I saw everything. She didn't provoke anything. He walked up, said degrading things, then kicked Chief Harris in the stomach. Her words were clear and direct, tightening the air even further. Committee members exchanged glances, a few nodded. It was clear they had heard and believed. Cole sat there, fists clenched, sweat beading on his forehead. When asked to respond, he jumped up, voice low and strained. She provoked me. She challenged my authority, looked at me with arrogance eyes. I reacted to keep order in the courtroom. The rebuttal rang out, but few looked convinced. Cold stares bore into him, and even he seemed to realize how weak his justification sounded when the video had already shown the truth. The committee remained silent, only the sound of pages turning and pens tapping. One member asked in an even voice, "You say provocation, yet there is no sign of resistance in the video. Why?" Cole hesitated, flustered, then scrambled to cite small details that weren't in the footage. His evasion drew headshakes, and some witnesses behind exchanged looks filled with both anger and pity for a man who had lost everything. The hearing continued with more testimonies, each one adding a piece to the complete picture of truth. Monica wasn't present, but her image in the video spoke louder than any defense. On screen, her face streaked with dried blood eyes, burning bright, had become the symbol of a truth that couldn't be distorted. And though Cole stood in the room with a microphone in front of him, he appeared 100 times smaller than that image. The internal investigation had only just begun, but the tide had already turned. Cole kept trying to defend himself, but the truth had been projected, and the witnesses had spoken. That room was no longer a place where he could dominate with shouting or a kick. It had become the place where he had to face the consequences of his action. And as the committee recorded every detail, his eyes continued to fix on him, Cole understood that the circle of justice was closing in step by step, leaving no way out. A heavy silence fell over the room as Cole finished his justification. Eyes shifted uneasily. No one spoke further, only the faint scratching of pens and the soft hum of recording equipment filled the air. In the tense stillness, a young man seated in the witness row suddenly stood. His steps trembled slightly, but his eyes burned bright, and his voice rang out louder, firmer than anything heard since the session began. "No," he kicked first. The sentence cut through like a blade, slicing apart the defense Cole had just constructed. Every gaze snapped toward the witness. He drew a breath, clenched his fists, then continued, "I was there from start to finish. Ms. Harris didn't do anything. She just sat there." He walked up, insulted her, then kicked her straight in the stomach in front of all of us. His voice shook, but each word landed with precision, each sentence an arrow fired at the accused. For a moment, time seemed to halt. halt. Each committee member turned toward Cole, their faces cold like mirrors reflecting undeniable truth. Cole felt himself sinking. A chill crawled from the nape of his neck down his spine, making him shudder. He wiped his forehead, his palm soaked in sweat, then quickly looked away. His face turned pale, his lips pressed tight, struggling to maintain his posture, but the trembling in his knees could no longer be hidden. In his mind, Monica's upright figure and burning gaze from the video loomed like a haunting ghost, and now the witness's statement carved deeper into his growing fear. The atmosphere in the hearing room shifted noticeably. People seated in the back began murmuring whispers, spreading their expressions slowly aligning. Some nodded, a few even exhaled as if someone had finally broken the wall of silence. A committee member at the center of the table leaned forward, taking quicker notes, then looked up to ask the witness a few follow-up questions. He answered clearly without hesitation, as though he had held back for too long, and now this was his release. Cole sat frozen, his mind in chaos. He wanted to scream, to argue, but his throat had closed tight. Every whisper around him tightened the pressure, sweat dripping down his collar in heavy drops. He knew the truth had slipped beyond his control, and any attempt to explain now would only expose his desperation further. The eyes of the committee, the witnesses, the spectators, each gaze hit him like a hammer, driving him deeper into the very chair he sat on. The hearing continued, but to Cole, all sound had faded into the distance. What he felt most clearly was the cold sweat trailing down his spine and the erratic pounding of his heart. He was no longer the man who shouted in court, no longer the one who strode through the hallway with a smug grin. Now he was an officer, stripped of all defense, laid bare in public, left for justice to peel back every layer of pretense. And under the pale, sterile light of the room, that image became proof that anyone who leans on violence will one day face the cold truth. The basement of the police headquarters echoed with the hum of old fans where the security tech room had been opened for the special investigation. White light from the large screen washed over the tense faces of the disciplinary committee. A young technician sat at the control desk, fingers moving quickly across the keyboard, bringing up internal camera footage from the courtroom. This was no longer the shaky clips from social media. The images here were sharp, the sound clear down to every breath. They saw Cole walk toward Monica, heard his growl, then the brutal kick rang out, the sound of his boot slamming into her body reverberating in the silent room. What had once been murky was now laid bare with undeniable clarity. The entire room held its breath with each frame. The moment Monica fell, then rose, wiping blood from her lip with pride in her eyes, played out unmistakably. One committee member pressed his hand to his forehead, exhaling as if releasing a burden, because the testimonies they'd heard now had vivid footage to back them up. Cole sat at the back, his face draining of color as the seconds passed, each detail slicing through the fragile hope he'd clung to. He knew there was no defense left. The technician played another file, this time audio extracted from the courtroom's internal microphone. The voice was unmistakable, Cole's spitting with hatred. "You're nothing but a parasite leeching off that witness chair." Then came the raw racial slurs, each word clear and sharp. The transcript appeared beside it, every line printed with cold precision. There was no room for excuses about edited clips, no way to deny that he had used violence and contempt to trample someone in the very place meant to uphold justice. The committee members exchanged looks, some leaning toward their microphones to formally acknowledge what had been heard. A senior officer, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "What we've seen and heard today is no longer an accusation. This is damning evidence. This was a deliberate act beyond justification." The weight of that statement settled heavily over the room like a verdict unspoken but already felt. Cole hung his head, hands trembling, sweat dripping onto the paper in front of him. He had once hoped to turn things around with words, but now his own voice from the recording had shattered that illusion. He raised a hand to cover his face, but the eyes in the room still bore into him, cold, unforgiving. In the text tech room, the truth was illuminated by both image and sound. Everyone knew this was a turning point with no return. The footage and transcripts just presented had ended all debate, pushing Cole to a brink from which there was no way back. And from this moment on, the story was no longer just an internal investigation. It was a warning that anyone who dares abuse power will have to face evidence that cannot be denied. Cole sat frozen after the video ended, his face pale, lips moving, but no words coming out. He was used to shouting, to using his voice to dominate, but now, faced with irrefutable evidence, his throat was dry veins bulging at his temples, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. The arrogant confidence he once wore in the courtroom had vanished, leaving only a trembling body. Head bowed, avoiding the cold stares directed straight at him. The projector hummed on in the closed room, its sound like a constant reminder that he had no foothold left. One committee member looked up from their notes and stared directly at him, the gaze so stern that Cole instinctively recoiled. The room remained silent, not the silence of complicity, but the weight of an impending verdict. Cole inhaled sharply but lost breath halfway, chest heaving, like someone who had run too far. He tried to speak, to say something more, but the white light from the screen cast over his face, exposing him fully before the public. Every previous excuse now seemed ridiculous because his own image and voice had become the witness against him. Those present in the room clearly saw the collapse in Cole's posture. Every awkward move he made deepened the impression of a man cornered, stripped of all control. One officer behind the desk couldn't hold back a shake of the head, letting out a sigh. Another set down their pen as if what they'd seen and heard was enough. Their eyes no longer searched, they had grown cold and final, the eyes of people ready to deliver judgment. Cole felt it. His back was soaked in sweat beads trailing down his neck and making him shiver. The trembling in his hands had spread to his legs, his knees tapping lightly against each other. He once believed aggression could mask the truth, but now in this room everyone was looking straight at him as a criminal. The truth had burst forth like a breached dam, sweeping away every effort to resist. The hearing continued, but for Cole, every passing second was another hammer blow. There was no room left for excuses, no chance to shift the blame. The truth now stood tall before him, so clear-cut that all he could do was bow his head. Trembling in his seat, he understood that the exit door had closed the moment the camera footage appeared, and in everyone's eyes that truth had fully locked him in, leaving no way to deny it. While Cole was still reeling from the shock of the video evidence, another committee member tapped the table, signaling the technician to open a new archive file. The large screen lit up carefully numbered documents, each bolded line signature and red stamp intact. These were Cole's old disciplinary records cases he thought had been buried for years. Each page revealed another crack in his fragile defense, stripping away the arrogant facade he had clung to. The first line read, "Complaint in 2016. Excessive use of force during the arrest of a black teenager." Below were witness statements and photos of injuries. Then came 2018, aggressive behavior during a vehicle stop, followed by a complaint from an immigrant family. In 2010, another report, racially charged language during night patrol. The list went on, each entry, a dark piece of Cole's career, forming a grim picture of an officer who had abused his power for a long time. The room grew so tense that some in the back shifted in their seats to stay composed. A journalist invited to document the hearing shook their heads, slowing lightly, eyes burning with anger as the numbers and cold words filled the screen. These incidents had once been dismissed, filed away for lack of evidence, or considered not serious enough. Now, all were dragged into the light, each record a shovel, turning over dirt from the past, exposing the truth. Cole hadn't just stumbled, he had been falling for a long time. Cole sat below, eyes wide in horror, as the familiar documents reappeared. He remembered each case, each summons, summons, each time he thought connections had shielded him. He swallowed hard, hands trembling, sweat pouring in stream. Each file shown was more than just evidence, it was a reminder that no mistake stays buried. He once believed his past had disappeared with those hidden reports, but now everything was being broadcast openly in front of the very people who would decide his fate. The committee read each line aloud, voices steady, cold, with no commentary, just letting the truth speak. Each flipped page was another hammer blow, cornering Cole into the dark. The once suppressed incident surfaced, each fact linking to the next, forming an undeniable chain from slurs to violence to disregard for law. All of it showed he had crossed lines again and again, and the system had repeatedly failed to stop him. In the cramped room, no one spoke except for the steady voice reading aloud, but everyone understood its meaning. This was no longer an isolated incident, but the full history of a corrupted officer. The dark past had resurfaced, casting its shadow over the present, and with each new file displayed, Cole knew another escape route had closed for good. Less than an hour after the disciplinary files aired on television, social media exploded in a storm of outrage. Hundreds of thousands of comments poured in at once, all caps, angry emojis flooding every platform. People shouted the same question, echoed everywhere. Why does he still have a badge? Under every edited clip, criticism mounted. This was an officer repeatedly accused with clear signs of abuse of power who should have been removed long ago, yet remained in uniform, even placed in public-facing roles. The accusations weren't just aimed at Cole, but at the weakness of the entire system. At small protests emerging across the city, that same question was raised on large signs. Groups of students gathered in the squares chanting over the sound of traffic. Why does he still have a badge? With each chant, the crowd raised fists in unison, a rhythmic declaration of resistance. The fury spread from the streets to auditoriums, from crowded cafes to dinner tables. People talked, raged, and more importantly, they no longer accepted silence from those in charge. Major news channels kept the story alive, broadcasting close-up shots of each old file with the stark caption below, "Repeated abuse of power." Still, as badge commentators pointed out, this wasn't just personal misconduct, but a complete failure of oversight across the institution. Cold analyses of how Cole was protected, how complaints were buried, only fueled the fire. Reporters stood outside the city police headquarters. Behind them, hastily erected fences, brick walls covered in graffiti slogans. In their ears were the sounds of angry chants pressing the department for answers. Public outrage quickly escalated into political pressure. Local lawmakers demanded open hearings, and several community leaders called for changes to the department's oversight structure. They insisted the issue wasn't just Cole, but the system that let him exist unchecked for so long, allowing him to become a living example of negligence and rot. An editorial in a major newspaper ended with a heavy line, "When someone like Cole still holds a badge, every badge in the force loses its meaning." On the day of the special trial, the atmosphere outside the courthouse was like a storm. Lines of reporters packed the entrance cameras, and video equipment raised high, the flashing lights forming a wall of brightness. Crowds of citizens filled the square out front, holding signs and chanting slogans, their voices rising in waves, making the tension even more intense. Security forces had to erect metal barricades to maintain order, but the uproar made clear this was no ordinary trial. It had become a symbol of public faith and the long wait for justice. Inside the courtroom, every seat was taken. The press rows packed with reporters, scribbling notes, microphones lined the aisle, all attention fixed on the prosecutor's stand. When the judge's gavel struck, the noise outside seemed to vanish, replaced only by heavy, anxious breathing within. The prosecutor stood, his voice ringing out clearly, reading the charges with firm, unrelenting resolve. He detailed each act, from verbal abuse to physical assault, then pointed at Cole, declaring that the defendant had grossly violated both legal and ethical codes. Every word cut through the wall of excuses Cole had tried to build, draining the color from his face. Tension peaked as the defense attorney was called to speak. The middle-aged man adjusted his tie, stepped forward with a thick file, but his voice trembled and his eyes darted nervously. He attempted to argue that Cole had merely reacted under provocation, that his actions stemmed from job stress and mental strain. But each word was silently countered by the cold, unforgiving stares in the room. Journalists whispered and took notes, some shook their heads, and a few witnesses pressed their lips tightly in quiet anger. The mood grew unmistakable. No defense could override the truth already laid bare. In the back rows, many observers listened intently, faces tense. A woman clutched her son's hand, tears in her eyes as if finding her own pain finally voiced. An older man sat with arms crossed, his stern gaze fixed on Cole, years of fury reflected in his eyes. Those silent responses only added to the suffocating weight in the courtroom, each breath carrying the pressure of an entire community's judgment. Cole sat at the defendant's table, body stiff, face darkened. He stared down at the wooden surface, avoiding every gaze, but each word of the indictment echoed sharply in his ears. He clenched his jaw, fists tightening, but it could not hide his helplessness. His lawyer's faltering arguments only deepened his isolation because the public had already seen everything the witnesses had spoken, and the records had exposed his past. Within the solemn walls of the courtroom, every mask had crumbled. The trial for justice began this way not merely as a proceeding against one individual, but as the moment an entire system had to face its failures. The judge's gavel had not yet come down, but everyone understood this was already a turning point, opening the path toward the verdict the public had long awaited. After the indictment and the faltering defense, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted to its most critical stage: witness testimony. An elderly woman slowly stepped up to the stand, her voice trembling, but every word rang clear. She recounted the moment Monica was kicked to the ground, stressing that Cole's actions took place in heavy silence without any provocation from the victim. Her breathing was labored, her eyes fixed on Cole as if forcing him to confront what he had tried to deny. Next, a young student was called to the stand, the one who had recorded the viral clip. He described in detail the chaotic scene, how the entire room was frozen in fear, and admitted that he himself had sat still. "If I hadn't released that video," he said, "I'd be haunted forever by my own silence." That confession shook the courtroom, and many in the gallery lowered their heads, reminded of the shared responsibility they all carried in that moment. Following him was a police officer who had witnessed the event. He wore a crisp uniform, spoke calmly but sharply. He confirmed hearing Cole's verbal abuse and seeing the kick delivered without any justification. This testimony carried particular weight because it came from a fellow officer, someone who understood the code of conduct and the gravity of every action in a courtroom. When he finished, the room fell completely silent, and every eye turned to Cole, who dropped his gaze to the floor. Another witness, a courthouse employee, stepped forward to add more. He shared that he had often seen Cole act aggressively toward people of color, even when no cameras were around, but had never had concrete proof. This testimony added to the string of reopened records, forming a complete picture of corruption. No further commentary was needed. The consistency between the stories and the documents had already made the truth undeniable. As each witness finished, the mood in the courtroom visibly shifted. The heavy tension gave way to a sense of certainty, as if the entire room had already glimpsed the verdict. No one said it aloud, but the exchanged looks between the judge, the prosecutor, and the jury made clear that the coming decision had no room for retreat. Faint murmurs rose from the gallery like the shared breath of a crowd that had waited a long time for this moment. Cole sat motionless, hands clenched, breathing quick and shallow. He knew every layer of denial had collapsed, each testimony another brick in the wall blocking his way. There was no chance left to reverse the outcome. The verdict hung over him, nearly certain, waiting only for the final moment to fall. In the stark white light flooding the room, that image became proof of the inevitable downfall of an abuser of power when the truth is built from countless voices that cannot be silenced. The courtroom sat in thick silence as the judge adjusted the folder in front of him, his stern eyes scanning each face in the room. The tension was so intense that even the sound of a page turning echoed clearly. Cole sat frozen in the defendant's chair, fists clenched his face, dazed sweat beating on his temples. The jury had returned after hours of deliberation, their eyes fixed on the high bench where the judge prepared to speak. Every whisper died instantly, as if the entire room was holding its breath in unison. The judge stood tall, his voice steady, each word slicing through the air. After reviewing all evidence, witness testimonies, and prior disciplinary records, the court finds the defendant, Ethan Cole, guilty of abusive power assault and racial slurs. The defendant is hereby stripped of his badge, all privileges of an officer, and sentenced to prison. The final sentence landed like a heavy bell, silencing all weak defenses from the accused. In that moment, the room erupted. The crowd jumped to their feet, thunderous applause rolling from the front rows to the back like a sudden downpour. Some cheered in relief, witnesses teared up, and others buried their faces in nearby shoulders to release emotions held in for days. The applause was not just for the verdict, but a collective affirmation that justice had finally spoken. Cole sat motionless, his face pale, his eyes dull. He seemed deaf to the noise, hands trembling on the wooden table, fingernails dragging lightly across the surface, searching for something to hold on to. The once aggressive figure in the courtroom now appeared small, swallowed by the roaring energy of the crowd. His collapse was no longer just a headline, it had become a historic moment captured by dozens of cameras sweeping across the room. In the press section, journalists scribbled furiously, hands sore but eyes shining. Tomorrow's headlines were already clear: Cole stripped of badge, sentenced to prison. The verdict wasn't just about one man. It was a reckoning for the entire system that once protected him. On many faces in the room, bottled-up rage had turned into a quiet satisfaction, like a wound finally stitched after days of bleeding. The applause still rang out, echoing into the plaza, where citizens watched the live stream on a giant screen. The scene turned the entire city into one unified body, witnessing justice in real time. In the light of the courtroom, the verdict marked not only the downfall of one abuser, but a signal that truth, no matter how long buried, always finds its way back. Monica sat in the front row, her eyes following every word of the verdict, but when the courtroom erupted in applause, she remained silent. Her gaze did not linger on Cole, nor did it shift to the crowd of reporters pushing in, but drifted into a distant space, deep and heavy. In her eyes, there was no triumph, only the quiet sorrow of someone who understood that a sentence against one man could never truly heal the wounds etched into the heart of a community. Her face was calm, but her stillness carried a weight of thought that anyone watching could feel. In that moment, Monica recalled the silence in the courtroom that day when everyone witnessed the kick and no one spoke up. The pain of the community did not lie solely in Cole's actions, but in that silence, that invisible complicity that left justice suspended. She understood that a prison sentence would not instantly erase mistrust, nor could it mend the scars left by years of prejudice. Every clap today was a signal of hope, but also a reminder of the long road ahead. Justice had been served with a clear verdict, but Monica recognized the gaps that still remained. Many black citizens who had once been victims had never been heard, and many similar incidents had never come to light. The image of Cole, with his head bowed in the defendant's seat, was only a fragment of the broader picture of corruption and abuse of power. The crowd might rejoice in this moment, but they would soon return to streets where injustice could strike again at any time. Monica closed her eyes briefly as if to steady the rush of thoughts within. She did not seek applause, nor did she let herself be swept up in the wave of celebration flooding the courtroom. She chose silence, letting her deep gaze speak for her. That silence caught people's attention, standing apart from the thunderous clapping around her, like a pause that forced everyone to realize that today's justice was only a beginning, not an end. Outside the courthouse, the cheers of the crowd still echoed, but within them was a note of longing. They rejoiced that the abuser had finally bowed his head, but they also knew the wounds of society remained and past injustices had yet to be fully answered. The chant of justice rose not just to celebrate the verdict, but as a call of vow that they would keep demanding, keep the fire alive until justice became a living truth in everyday life. Monica still sat there, steady, her deep eyes reflecting both faith and unease. She knew the road ahead would be harsher than any kick ever thrown at her, and in her silence a powerful message was clear. Justice may have spoken today, but healing will only come when the whole community rises together, refusing to repeat the silence that once was the heaviest sentence of all. The day of sentencing came to a close, but its echoes did not remain within the courtroom walls. Outside, the city's central square lit up under a sea of people gathering. Large white banners with "Red Justice" printed across them flapped in the wind, each letter glowing under streetlights like the beating heart of an awakened community. Crowds stretched from the courthouse steps to nearby streets, chants rising with drums and song, forming a powerful chorus of resistance that was disciplined and peaceful. In the crowd, Monica's image appeared on posters, her proud gaze printed boldly, becoming a symbol of renewed belief. The public didn't call her by title, they called her by spirit as a guide. Each time someone held that image high, the crowd erupted as if drawing strength to keep moving forward. No longer just a woman once kicked to the ground in court, Monica had become a figure representing the power of rising, a reminder that justice only holds meaning when protected by collective action. Families brought children, college students walked shoulder to shoulder, and even the elderly came out with canes, unwilling to stay home. All blended into the mass of people, eyes fixed on banners waving above. The atmosphere pulsed with energy, not from anger alone, but from a hope newly ignited. Candles were passed from hand to hand, their small lights linking into a glowing chain across the square, turning the space into a massive living flame. Monica did not appear in the crowd, but her presence was everywhere. People repeated her words from court, chanting them like a rallying cry. Each time the phrase rang out, the crowd surged as if continuing the path with her. Her image took center stage on live broadcasts, and in the square, large screens replayed the moment she declared herself the new police chief, giving people something to look at, to cheer for, as if she stood right there among them. In the cries of justice, in the flapping flags, in the soft candlelight, a fire had been lit not only in the streets, but inside each person. It was the fire of hope, of resolve, of unity. Monica had become a symbol, not because of her title, but because she stood firm, faced the truth, and passed on a belief that truth could pierce the dark. And that fire, once ignited, would keep burning, lighting the way forward for a community determined to carry it all the way through. The unified chants from the square rose like waves sweep through every street. Thousands stood shoulder to shoulder, fists raised high, repeating the same cry over and over, "Justice, justice." The sound, blended with drum beats and the stomp of feet on pavement, forming a powerful rhythm that seemed to shake the entire city. From high-rise windows, people opened balconies, leaned out, and shouted along as if every invisible barrier had been torn down. In that moment, each shout no longer belonged to one person, but had become the voice of the collective, a declaration that silence would no longer be accepted. Slogans followed one after another, from justice for all to end, abuse of power, mixed with impromptu songs rising from groups of young people holding loudspeakers. The energy spread quickly, pulling even passers-by into the swelling crowd. The candles that once flickered alone had become a blazing sea of fire, reflected in the eyes of thousands, each person feeling they were part of something far greater than themselves. Live broadcasts from the scene kept the public updated. National news channels showing crowds chanting like a rushing tide, with close-ups of faces glowing with conviction. Reporters described it as one of the largest but most peaceful demonstrations the city had ever seen, where no one smashed windows or turned to rage, but instead used their voices to apply pressure. They chanted, they stood firm, and each shout echoed like a hammer striking the stubborn door of a stalled system. That unity quickly turned into mountain pressure on those in power. Nightly news programs concluded that the police department could no longer avoid accountability as the wave of outrage had become a current of reform. Politicians who had once remained silent were now forced to speak, many calling for emergency meetings to discuss structural changes. On social media, the hashtag #reform now flooded timelines connecting those on the streets to millions watching across the country. The momentum spread like wildfire, forcing the entire system to respond. City council meetings were called repeatedly, focused on enforcing transparency and discipline, tightening oversight, and implementing independent review mechanisms. Outside, the people kept chanting each call, acting as leverage no official could ignore. They knew that if dismissed, the fire burning in the streets could turn into a storm that would sweep away every seat of power. In the flickering glow of thousands of candles and the echoing chants ringing through the city, one truth became undeniable. Justice doesn't end with the sentencing of one person. It must be sustained through deep reform. The people had risen unified in one voice, and the pressure they created could no longer be extinguished. From the fire in the streets, a new era was being sparked. After days of protests surging through the streets, pressure from the public forced the central government to act. A national police reform summit was held in the Capitol, gathering high-level figures from members of Congress and cabinet ministers to representatives from various states. The event was broadcast live nationwide, with millions watching, awaiting the first steps to mend the deep fractures in public trust. The Grand Hall was solemnly arranged, rows of seats packed tightly, microphones set neatly in place, light shining down directly on the podium. The atmosphere was formal, but heavy, as everyone understood that the decisions made today would shape the fate of an entire generation. When Monica Harris's name was called, the room erupted in sustained applause mixed with waves of emotion. She stepped onto the stage, calm-faced, eyes shining. Her voice rang out, not loud but steady, each word echoing like the heartbeat of millions tuning in. Justice has no color. The short sentence brought a few seconds of stunned silence. Then the room burst into thunderous applause. The words became a declaration, dissolving racial lines, delivering a clear message that justice must never be confined by skin color or origin. Leaders seated in the front row nodded slightly, their expressions serious, but marked by agreement. Some lawmakers flipped open notebooks to jot the phrase down as a key point to revisit in upcoming sessions. Legal reform experts seated farther back whispered among themselves, tapping fingers lightly on the table in support. The atmosphere in the room shifted from weighty to energized, as if everyone had just witnessed a statement destined to become part of history. Monica continued stressing that reform could not stop at promises, but required concrete action. Transparency and disciplinary processes expanded, independent oversight, and training a new generation of officers grounded in human values rather than fear. Her words were firm, direct, and unwilling to skirt around difficult topics. With each sentence, more heads nodded in agreement, as though her honesty was cutting through the usual layers of politics and awakening a long-dormant sense of responsibility. Outside the hall, thousands gathered to watch via large screens. When the phrase "justice has no color" rang out, they applauded in unison, and many moved to tears. That line immediately flooded social media, becoming a new banner stretching from the streets to the legislature. The rare moment of unity between citizens and leaders carried an unmistakable sense of collective power, a clear signal that change was no longer something that could be delayed. In the brilliant light light of the hall, Monica stood not just as a police chief, but as a bearer of the community's flame. Her words, together with the nods of agreement from national leaders, opened the door to a new chapter. And from that national forum, the message echoed far and wide, affirming that justice, once upheld by millions of voices, would never again be confined to the shadows. Outside the hall, thousands of young students gathered in large groups, their eyes fixed on the live broadcast playing in the main square. When Monica's voice rang out, "Justice has no color," the crowd erupted in cheers. Many jumped, waved flags, and some recorded the moment on their phones, live streaming for friends across the country. Their youthful faces lit with belief, they chanted Monica's name as a symbol of a new generation, both a source of inspiration and living proof that a better society could be built. The electric atmosphere spread from the square to social media, with clips of the cheering crowd shared at lightning speed, flooding every platform within hours. The students' excitement became a catalyst, fueling the momentum for justice. Universities held their own forums, inviting legal experts and students to discuss police reform. In lecture halls, Monica's speeches were replayed, each round of applause making it feel like she was there in person. A new generation had found its voice, viewing this moment as a milestone in the ongoing journey for justice. Student newspapers released special editions headlined with her quote, embedding the message deeper into the minds of readers. From the Capitol, the event quickly reached beyond the city where it all began. International media began covering the story, analyzing it as a landmark example in the fight against racism and abuse of power in America. European newspapers featured Monica on their front pages, captioned, "The woman who turned pain into reform." In many countries, civil society groups cited the case and calls for their own governments to re-examine policing systems. A wave of solidarity spread, transforming the story from a local trial into a global forum. National politicians could no longer stay on the sidelines. Several senators issued public statements supporting reform, quoting Monica's own words to emphasize their stance. Some states immediately announced internal reviews of police disciplinary systems, showing that the impact of this event had exceeded all regional boundaries. The story no longer belonged to one city, but had become a test for the entire country's ability to face its flaws and embrace change. Meanwhile, across international social media platforms, millions of comments poured in from around the world, with people from many countries expressing support and sharing their own experiences of injustice. The case had crossed borders, turning Monica into a global symbol, not just a newly appointed police chief, but the face of unwavering resistance against discrimination. And as the students' cheers continued to echo across the square, everyone understood that the flame of justice had spread far beyond the original city, becoming a global wave that could no longer be extinguished. Night had fallen, and the police chief's office sat quietly under the soft yellow glow of a desk lamp. Outside, the city was still alive with ongoing protests and discussions, but inside that enclosed space, only the ticking of the clock echoed. Monica sat alone at her desk, a stack of unfinished paperwork in front of her. Her face was calm, but her deep-set eyes drifted toward a distant time where memories still lingered like cuts that never truly healed. She remembered the early days in the military when she first joined and was met with skeptical stares from her own team. The whispers behind her back, the sneers of dismissal, had more than once forced her to bite her tongue and endure. During one field exercise, a teammate had deliberately shoved her into a sand pit, their mocking laughter ringing all around. She had stood up, brushed the dirt from her shoulders, and kept running, but in her heart, the sting stayed etched like a wound that refused to fade. Monica's eyes settled on her right hand, where a long scar stretched from the back of her hand down to her wrist. The scar was not just a physical mark, but a memory of an altercation when she was stopped and assaulted for daring to speak out against injustice. Tonight, under the dim light, the scar shimmered faintly silver, each dull throb a reminder that her journey had never been easy. She gently ran her fingers over the rough skin, feeling its cold ridges, recalling the cost she had paid for every step that brought her to this position. In her mind, faces from the past resurfaced: commanders who dismissed her capabilities, young soldiers who looked down on and rejected the presence of a black woman among their ranks. She held no hatred, but she never forgot. Those very pains had forged her strength, forcing her to stand tall no matter how fierce the headwinds blew. The room remained silent, bathed in golden light over the towering folders. Monica took a deep breath, the scar on her hand burning slightly, but instead of avoiding it, she embraced it as part of her being part of her personal history. She understood that the scar wasn't hers alone. It represented millions of others who had endured discrimination and injustice. Each time she looked at it, she reminded herself that her current duty wasn't to avenge the past, but to ensure no one else would carry a new scar. That night, in stillness, Monica sat motionless for a long while, her hand resting on the old scar. Her gaze no longer lingered on pain, but looked forward to a future where reform would not be a slogan, but a reality. The scar throbbed like a quiet reminder that the road ahead would be hard, but she was ready to walk it with the strength not only of herself, but of a community placing its hopes in her hands. After a long moment, lost in memory, Monica opened the newly delivered folder on her desk containing a list of cases long forgotten where most of the victims were people of color, and none had ever been granted a fair chance at justice. She turned each page, her eyes sharpening as if seeing herself reflected in them. Some cases had been closed with vague conclusions, others buried in drawers, leaving innocent people to live a lifetime in quiet injustice. She couldn't look away. From her own pain, Monica drew resolve, sending out a formal request to reopen all similar cases. In it, she emphasized that any instance showing signs of abuse of power must be reinvestigated, and that burying the truth simply because the perpetrator wore a uniform would no longer be acceptable. Her directive spread like an unexpected wind. Disciplinary units, internal affairs, and even the court system were forced to regroup. A series of back-to-back meetings followed, old dusty files brought into the light, every detail scrutinized under sharper eyes. The media reported constantly, the public watched closely, and families who had once lost faith were now given the chance to speak. For them, this wasn't just a process of investigation, but an act of restoring dignity after years of silence. Within the police force itself, Monica's move sparked fierce debate. Some officers feared that digging into the past would expose rot that could stain the entire institution's reputation. But more and more younger officers supported her, seeing this as a chance to cleanse, to separate those who abused power from those who genuinely served. New generations of officers stepped forward in front of the press, stating they were ready to cooperate and prove transparency. The division didn't shake Monica's resolve. If anything, it reinforced it, because she knew a system could only grow stronger by facing its own wounds. Each reopened case carried heartbreaking stories. Citizens gathered outside courthouses to follow them, watching as names once forgotten were spoken aloud again, and witnesses who once trembled now stood ready to tell the truth. The rising public pressure forced officials to move faster, no longer able to stall or cover up. A wave of former officers was placed under investigation, with some files revealing signs of evidence tampering and deliberate concealment. These revelations were shocking, but they also opened a door to rebuild from the ground up. When the first report on the investigation's progress was released, public reaction exploded. People felt that change had truly begun, no longer just empty promises. The media called it a root-level purge because it didn't just address individuals but peeled away decaying layers to rebuild the foundation. Many legal experts described it as an unprecedented step in the history of the city's police force, perhaps even the nation. In her office, late at night, Monica closed the folder, a glint of determination in her eyes. The scar on her hand still throbbed, but this time it was no longer a haunting reminder. It was a flame urging her her to keep moving forward. The system had begun to shift in a new direction, not through some miracle, but through the courage to confront the past. And from that deep-rooted transformation, a greater hope had begun to emerge that once justice is lit, it can never again be extinguished. The law school lecture hall glowed brightly in the late afternoon, hundreds of students sitting shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on the large screen up front. On it, the footage of Cole's kick replayed this time, not to provoke outrage, but as a vivid case study on power and justice. The room was so quiet, you could hear a pen tapping lightly on a desk. Every student watched closely, studying each detail from Monica's gaze as she stood up to the stunned silence in the courtroom. For them, this was no longer current events. It had become a legal scenario analyzed in their coursework. An elderly professor, his hair silver white, stood at the lectern, one hand resting on a thick case file. His voice was deep and slow. "This is a lesson about dignity and justice." He paused for a few seconds, letting the words sink in, then continued. "Human dignity cannot be trampled by a badge or a title. Justice cannot be served through power alone, but must begin with truth and courage." Pens scratched across paper as students wrote down his words, some looking up with eyes lit by the weight of the message. A student stood up, voice filled with emotion, and she shared that watching the clip, he didn't just see an act of violence, he saw the terrifying silence in that courtroom. He said that silence was the true core of today's lesson, that justice cannot wait for someone else to act. It requires those who dare to break the silence. The class erupted in applause, not to cheer, but to affirm the power of an insight finally spoken. The professor nodded, his gaze warm, as if seeing the seeds of a new generation starting to grow. Other students spoke in turn, some analyzing how legal processes needed reform, others emphasizing the role of the media in forcing systems to change. All of it stemmed from one seemingly isolated moment, yet one that held a timeless lesson. In every reflection, Monica Harris's name was mentioned with respect, not just because she was the police chief, but because she had become a symbol of resilience and belief in what's right. The lecture hall grew more vibrant, discussions flowing one into the next, forming a powerful current of thought. The professor let the debates unfold, occasionally smiling, occasionally offering a brief comment to steer the conversation. He knew the greatest legacy of this event would not be found in statutes or court rulings, but in how this generation would absorb it and turn it into action. The lessons drawn today would follow them into courtrooms, law offices, and positions of public service in the years to come. When the class ended, students still gathered in small groups, debating passionately, even out in the hallway. They spoke of courage, transparency, of justice as a goal that must never be abandoned. And in that atmosphere, the legacy of the case had truly spread. It did not end with a verdict. It did not stop at reform, but had entered the minds of the young, planting seeds for the future. From one brutal kick, society had drawn a priceless lesson, and that legacy would be passed down through generations like a flame, lighting the path toward justice. In the weeks that followed, the spirit of discussion filled universities, community centers, and even high school classrooms. Young people who had once been indifferent or felt voiceless were now awakened after witnessing the entire chain of events. In Monica Harris, they saw not a high-ranking official, but a human being who had risen from pain, who dared to face violence and silence to assert the value of justice. That alone inspired them, driving many students to volunteer for research projects, community oversight groups, or initiatives demanding transparency in policing. The power of the event turned them into seeds ready to sow change, and the stories they retold among friends became the push for many to pursue law journalism or public service. A wave of forums opened where young people analyzed, debated, and searched for solutions for a fairer society. In essays and research papers, Monica Harris's name appeared constantly, a living testament to the bond between the individual and the collective in the pursuit of truth. They looked at her and saw that even when burdened by prejudice, even when scarred both physically and mentally, a person could become a flame of of guidance if they held fast to their value. From small classroom discussions to national conferences, her name was spoken of as the beginning of a movement, as a new point on the timeline of justice and human rights. Professors in law schools, veteran journalists, and even seasoned politicians agreed that Monica Harris had entered history not through her title but through her painful experience and the way she transformed it into collective strength. Her name was compared to figures who had once reshaped entire systems, and gradually Monica's image appeared in textbooks and volumes on social reform. High school students preparing presentations on fairness and dignity cited her words, using them as a compass to explain what justice means in this century. In the media, her image was no longer tied to the moment of being attacked, but to the proud stance she carried when stepping before the public, when declaring that justice has no color. The name Monica Harris, through every newspaper article, every speech, every academic discussion, gradually carved itself into the consciousness of society. It became a symbol of a turning point where pain was transformed into strength, where one person could stand as the representative of an entire generation. And as the young continued to speak her name not with pity, but with pride and inspiration, it meant her legacy had truly gone beyond the bounds of a personal story to enter history as an indelible milestone. That night, the city square blazed as bright as day, thousands of candles flickering in the hands of citizens who had gathered from every corner. Drums beat in a steady rhythm, chants rolled in waves without pause, fueling an atmosphere both fierce and solemn. At the front, a hastily built but sturdy wooden platform had become the center of attention. When Monica Harris stepped up, floodlights struck her face and the square fell silent, broken only by the wind rushing through banners whipping in the air. Her eyes swept across the vast sea of people, where every gaze burned with hope, where every heart beat in the same rhythm of expectation. She stood tall, one hand resting lightly on the microphone, her voice not loud but firm enough for all to hear. Justice is not a gift. It is something we must claim. The words cut through the night more powerful than any drum or chant. For a brief moment, the square froze, then erupted into a storm of sound. Thousands of hands clapped, the noise pounding against the walls, spilling into nearby streets, merging with shouts into a chorus of pride. People in the front rows were moved to tears. Some fell to their knees. Some raised their banners high as if to etch this moment into collective memory. The applause did not fade, but roared on like a waterfall. Each clap an affirmation, an absolute agreement. Monica paused for a few seconds to let the sound roll away, then continued, her voice carried with the night wind. We have seen the truth. We have watched the darkness torn apart, but the journey does not end here. If today we shout for justice, then tomorrow, the next day, and the years ahead, we must live to protect it. The crowd roared back in unison the word justice, booming like thunder, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Young people raised their phones high, the glow of their screens sparkling like an artificial sky of stars. They captured Monica's strong stance, her words striking their hearts. Older faces nodded, eyes brimming with faith, knowing the next generation had found its symbol. Families lifted their children onto their shoulders so they could see clearly, so the memory of a night when justice roared would be etched into their minds from childhood. Monica lowered her voice, her eyes still fixed on the sea of people. Each of you here is a part of justice. Do not wait for someone else to rise. Do not believe that one verdict is enough. It is we, through action, through voice, through resolve, who will keep justice alive. Her words were like a final message not only for this night, but for the future. The crowd fell silent for a few seconds, absorbing every syllable, then burst again into shouts, this time louder and fiercer than before, as if determination itself had ignited into fire within every heart. That night, the candles in the people's hands burned brighter than ever. Their light connected thousands into an endless stream illuminating the vast square. The applause, the chants, and Monica's words became a collective anthem, no longer hers alone, but belonging to the entire community. In that wave, everyone knew justice had spoken, and from now on it would not be buried again. Monica stepped back from the microphone, silently watching the sea of people still burning with fervor. On her face was a faint smile, not of satisfaction but of belief that the legacy had been passed on, that the flame of justice had been placed in the hands of the next generation, and it would burn forever in the history of this city. After the thunderous applause, the square still blazed with thousands of candles held high. Monica stood on the wooden platform, quietly gazing into the distance. Before her was a surging sea of people, behind her a city that had just endured days of turmoil. Her eyes no longer carried fear nor private burdens, but opened wide, reaching beyond the boundaries of the square of the city, as if fixed on a broader future. They were the eyes of someone who had walked through darkness, now strong enough to believe the lamp of justice would never go out. In the fleeting silence, Monica recalled everything from the moment she was kicked to the cold tile floor to the day she stood and declared her role before the public. The years of prejudice, the wounds on her body, and the invisible pain in her soul had all become material from which she built her strength. Standing here, she understood her story had surpassed the limits of the personal, becoming proof that anyone, no matter how weak or disregarded, could turn themselves into a guiding flame if they dared to rise. That distant gaze also reflected a quiet weight, for Monica knew justice was not something won in a single night. She saw the long road ahead, where society still held countless injustices waiting to be exposed, where future generations would have to continue the fight. But unlike before, she was no longer alone. Looking out across the square, she saw thousands of faces believing together, shouting together, and that truth erased her fear of isolation. The dread of abandonment had become the conviction that whenever justice was strangled, the people would be the first to reignite the flame. A soft wind swept through, stirring the red and white banners flying above. The chants slowly faded, not from lost fervor, but because each person was savoring the sacred silence. In Monica's eyes, this night was not the ending of a single trial, but the beginning of a new journey. The words she spoke, the moment she stood firm, would all be remembered as part of history. And it was that far-reaching gaze that became her vow, a silent promise that she would never turn away from the responsibility she had chosen. As she stepped down from the platform, Monica saw clearly that what she left behind was not only a sentence for an abuser of power, but a legacy for the entire community. That legacy did not lie in paperwork, nor was it confined to an office, but lived in the faith passed from one person to another. From the students cheering in lecture halls to the elders gripping candles in the square, all carried within them the message that justice could be delayed but never lost. In the final round of applause, rising like waves, Monica smiled faintly, knowing the road ahead still held many trials, yet the belief had been planted fully. Her legacy was that belief etched deep in the community's memory that justice, in some way, would always find its way back. And in the fearless, distant gaze of that woman, people saw an unspoken promise that the flame just lit would never go out. As the lights from the square faded, the story of Monica Harris closed like an epic engraved in the memory of an entire community. From the first moment she was humiliated in the courtroom to the instant she stood on the wooden stage in the square, the journey was not only the clash between an individual and an oppressor, but society's battle against shadows that had lingered far too long. Ethan Cole once believed power and aggression could shield him, but the truth reversed everything, turning him into a symbol of rot, while Monica became the embodiment of resolve and dignity. What made this story story extraordinary was the way it exposed layer after layer of silence in society. At first, the silence in the courtroom was like an invisible sentence leaving Monica to rise in solitude. Yet, from that silence, a new force emerged as the community realized that silent complicity was what sustained injustice. The viral clip, the eruption of public outrage, and the pressure that forced the entire system to act all proved that justice does not arise from one person but from collective strength when millions of voices merge into a storm that compels the truth to speak. The greatest twist did not lie in the office Monica held, but in how the truth was revealed at the exact moment, turning someone once seen as a powerless witness into the highest leader of the force. That image shook society's faith, for it proved no one could be diminished by prejudice or violence. And what gave the story its global resonance was that from an act that seemed personal, it opened the door to sweeping reform reaching every street, every classroom, every national forum. The wounds Monica carried, both physical and emotional, were no longer her private pain, but a testament to resilience. The scar on her hand reminded them that injustice had once existed, yet also stood as proof that such wounds could be turned into strength to drive change. When she demanded the reopening of forgotten cases, the system began to shift. When she stood before students, lessons of dignity and justice were passed to a new generation. And when she stepped into the square, her final message was not only for a crowd, but for an entire people searching for a way forward. From this story, many profound lessons can be drawn. First, justice does not appear on its own. It must be fought for, protected, and nurtured by the courage of those willing to rise. Second, the power of community can transform an entire system so long as silence does not linger. It was a collective resolve that turned Cole's kick into the spark of an unprecedented reform. And most importantly, this story proves that human dignity is inviolable, that when someone is steadfast enough to hold firm, they can turn pain into faith, defeat into a guiding symbol. The legacy Monica left was not only in the office of the police chief, nor solely in the concrete reforms already begun, but in the faith spread everywhere. People believed that justice, though sometimes delayed, would never disappear, for every generation carries the duty of keeping it alive. Students looked to her story and found motivation to pursue law journalism or social work. Those who had once been silent in fear now realized their voices too were part of the collective strength. And the generations to come, when they speak of Monica Harris, will not recall the kick that knocked her down, but her proud stance on that blazing night in the square when she declared that justice was not a gift, but a path all must guard together. The story closed, but its echo lingered, leaving behind the conviction that no matter how heavy the shadows, justice will always find its way back so long as there are people willing to rise and keep the light alive in their hearts.